Welcome to the Toon Under Podcast. I'm Jack, as usual, and with me is Bobby and Ballarat. How you doing, Bobby?
Good, Jack. Going well. How are you? How about yourself?
I'm very good, thanks. We've also got a special guest today to help us go through some of the French links with Newcastle. We've got the French football correspondent for CBS Sports, Mr. Jonathan Johnson. How are you, Jonathan?
Hey there, guys. Doing very well, thanks. Thanks a lot for having me on.
No worries. Thanks for coming on. Now, I'm assuming from your name that you're not French and from your accent. So I want to ask you, how did you get into covering French football, and what do you think it is that makes French football so unique and exciting?
It's a good question. Yeah, I'm not French. Les Gossip actually sort of stems from my time with Sky Sports when I was back in the UK. Originally, I come from just outside of Birmingham, Solihull, so Jack Grealish territory. I'm a Villa fan for my sins, and yeah, it's funny that you ask, because I had sort of part of my journalistic career, my early days in the UK with Sky. And then when I came back to France to establish myself as a journalist over here, just after PSG had been taken over by the Qataris, it was around about the same time that Newcastle were buying up half of Ligue 1. So I started out with this column called Les Gossip with Sky Sports. And I've kept the Twitter handle ever since. I still do bits for Sky every now and then, but that column is long gone. But no, my memories of Newcastle being linked with pretty much every player in France is still fresh in my memory. And I think, to be honest, France as a destination, certainly in terms of talent hunters, just hasn't changed since. If anything, more clubs have become aware of the talent that you can tap into in France. Obviously, it's a little more complicated now with the Premier League, given Brexit has come into force since. But, it is still a market that a lot of big clubs and other leagues in Europe are starting to target and try and find gems and bring them in. You look at the Bundesliga, there's a lot of German clubs who now look at not necessarily even Ligue 1, but also Ligue 2, try and find talents that haven't yet been identified, bring them in to low cost and then sell them on, once they explode. But with the changes that are going on in France at the moment, there's more money finally coming into the domestic game again. There's changes to the contracts that can be offered to youth players. There is a hope that pipeline that was once so fruitful for the Magpies, will dry up a little bit, and some of the talent will be able to stay within the borders here.
Yes. What is it about French clubs that mean they can get these players, like, real quality players? Is it just that they're more willing to take the plunge on maybe South American players before Premier League clubs are? What is it?
No, it's not. To be honest, there's very few clubs who really find success transfer-wise in terms of bringing in good fees. Who do it by bringing in talent from other countries. The thing that French clubs have in abundance is great youth facilities. They've concentrated on creating very strong academy systems. And a lot of them can call upon massive reservoirs of talent in major areas in France. Look at Paris, for example. I think it's up there as the top talent provider of European cities across the entire continent, and I think it's maybe only second to Brazil in terms of talent exportation, sort of outside of the country itself. So it's there are huge reservoirs of talent dotted in across sort of the suburban areas of big cities in France, and I think scouting for young players has been majorly ahead of the curve in France compared to most European countries for years now. Obviously, we know all about the Centre of Excellence at Clairefontaine as well, and I think the changes that were put into place in French football decades ago, we're really seeing sort of that paying dividends for these French clubs now, because you have these teams at various levels of the youth system who are constantly providing a conveyor belt of talent to these clubs at senior level, and these clubs can either use these players, have them for a couple of seasons, add to their value, or sometimes the talent is so obvious, given that clubs are now scouting a youth level or reserves as opposed to actually the senior sides. Those talents will actually get taken away before they're even able to sign professional contracts.
And you just look at the French national team; they've probably got 2 teams worth of players that could compete in a tournament, couldn't they? You look at the bench, and it's absolutely frightening.
I was going to say, which one? There's two teams, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'd say that you could probably make more than two teams, and be very competitive. You look at all the different age levels. You look at the under 21s, and people are like, it's crazy. It's almost stronger than many of the senior sides. I mean, I know that Australia would kill to have that kind of talent available to them at international level at the moment, despite qualifying for the World Cup. And I think there's so many international coaches who must be jealous of Didier Deschamps, and also quite frustrated in a way when you look at sort of how stagnant the national team has become since winning the World Cup. I think there is a massive hope as well that Zinedine Zidane will come in and maybe breathe fresh life into Les Bleus at some point in the near future. And it's also obvious, why he might be sort of holding off from wanting to take a new job like a PSG. When he's got the possibility to coach some of those generational talents that you have in that French setup at the moment. So no, it is, it's an absolute pleasure to be able to cover Ligue 1 and the French national team week in, week out. I've been treated to some fantastic quality football over the years, and some major achievements, and fingers crossed there's more to come, both for the domestic game and at international level. But it does feel at times like when people are looking at the French national team, almost like they don't test out enough of their talent, and it frustrates a lot of people.
Look forward to the Socceroos playing France in the World Cup. It's going to be
got that as well, 4 years on from the last one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in terms of Newcastle, so gone are the days when Alan Carr's dad, Graham Carr, and Mike Ashley took their bargain trolley to France for the likes of Johan Cabaye and Moussa Sissoko. There was Debuchy, there was Gouffran, there was Yanga and Biwa, Roman Amalfitano, the lesser-known Amalfitano brother. There was Sylvain Marveau, there was Emmanuel Riviere. The list goes on and on and on. But Newcastle had varying success with those players. A couple of them were amazing. Ben Arthur's one I didn't mention there as well. And I think Cabaye was probably the best of that lot. But Newcastle is still looking into the French market, like a lot of clubs around Europe are. So I just want to touch on three players then who have been linked pretty strongly with Newcastle since January. So the first one isn't French, he's Dutch. We're talking about Sven Botman. There's talk of a 30 million bid to Lille for him. There's talk that Lille are kind of holding out for a bit more than that. There's strong interest from AC Milan as well. This is one that Newcastle fans are quite excited about. Young defender. We need young defenders. He's got a big reputation. What's your kind of understanding at the minute, Jonathan, about where that is and how that might play out?
Well, the thing to know about Lille for a start is the group that are in charge there, Merlin Partners, have installed Olivier Letang as the president. And basically his mission is to recoup the money that has been invested into that project. And there are a lot of talented players within that squad who could potentially be used to raise some of the money, that would go to reimbursing that acquisition. One of them would be Botman. Another one would be Jonathan David. Another is Renato Sanchez. There was an expectation last season after they won the Ligue 1 title, just by pipping PSG to the post, that there would be something of a fire sale and that those funds would be raised relatively immediately. That hasn't happened. My feeling is that Letang was sort of banking on Lille getting themselves back into European competition once again and being in a strong position going to the negotiating table to perhaps sell one or two of those talents, but also to build for the future. But it didn't work out that way at all. Jocelyn Gourvenec, who's since been dismissed as Lille coach, really struggled. And despite a spirited showing in the Champions League, they fell out of all European contention in Ligue 1 and were very underwhelming defending champions. And now Letang is under major pressure because not only have the results been poor, but there's not been any major financial returns in the way that was expected. And suddenly these guys like Botman and Sanchez and David, their valuations that were sky high maybe 12 months ago are a lot lower now, which is why you've got Newcastle going in at what they feel is an acceptable market rate, and Lille are trying to hold out for a little bit more. There are changes going on at the club at the moment. Paulo Fonseca, I believe, is soon to be confirmed as head coach. An impressive hire for Lille, but it doesn't change the fact that they won't have any continental competition this campaign, which means that they are still essentially over a barrel in terms of moving players on. My feeling is that at least one player or two will move before the end of this month. You normally have sort of like the financial cutoff point between the previous season's budget and the budget for the one to come. I imagine that the hope will be that they can squeeze like the likes of Botman and David into next season's budget and perhaps get away with selling a Zeki Celic and maybe Renato Sanchez before the end of this month, given that Sanchez was so close to moving on before. So I think that something definitely could change if maybe one of those two moves doesn't go ahead. But I think that Lille will really try to dig their heels in with Botman, because Botman hasn't gone through a dip in form like a Jonathan David, who essentially went about 20 matches, I think, without scoring, despite the fact he was on fire over the first part of the season. So I think Botman is probably the golden goose to some extent to this Lille side, which is why they're trying to extract the absolute maximum in terms of a fee. But if Lille's owners decide to take a different decision and maybe change president or whoever's running the sporting project, then perhaps there is hope that Newcastle can obtain Botman for a relatively reasonable fee. But I think the danger now must be considered that some other club comes in with a slightly higher bid than Newcastle, despite obviously the major financial backing that the Magpies can enjoy now, and maybe blow them out of the water in terms of their valuation of the player.
Yeah, so just on Botman, in terms of the type of player, I've watched him a few times and he's very impressive, very composed and solid. The query about him has been his pace, whether that's Premier League quality. What do you say in terms of people that say that he doesn't have the pace for the Premier League?
I'd probably ask them, first of all, why a defender's pace would probably be that important to them. I don't think it's necessarily the most important attribute for a defender. I think when you're as complete a player as Botman is, I don't think it matters too much. I mean, maybe in terms of sort of positioning and mobility, that might be slightly more questionable. I wouldn't say he's necessarily at an elite level yet. He didn't stand out as much as a De Ligt did with Ajax before he moved on to Juventus. But that's not to say that he doesn't have the potential to do so. I do feel that Botman's development probably would have been better served in a team that was in better form last season. I don't think he's necessarily stagnated in terms of his game, but I don't think he's come on as much as he could have if he'd been playing at a team that was in better form and better organised overall than Lille last season. So I do think that there is still significantly untapped potential in his game and areas for improvement. But I don't think that I would necessarily single out his speed as something that he would necessarily struggle with in the Premier League. I think in the Premier League, when you're coming in, especially coming in from Ligue 1, one thing that will immediately stand out is their vision of the game, their ability to read the game. That's always extremely impressive. And I remember a lot of the guys who joined Newcastle sort of a decade ago or so, really stood out because of that. Guys like Cabaye. And I think as well, the strength that you have to even be considered to be an acquisition for a Premier League club. And Botman definitely has that. He has the aerial prowess as well. And I think that, with the right kind of project in the Premier League, he's definitely a player who could develop into one of Europe's leading talents in that position.
I'm pleased you mentioned Johan Cabaye there, because I was wondering whether Lille just don't want to sell us Botman now, because we got Johan Cabaye for $4.5 million back 10 years ago. He was a fantastic signing. So if we do get Botman, and if he can get even half as good as Cabaye was for us, we'll be in for a real success, I think.
He was a fantastic success, Cabaye, but I think the thing to bear in mind with that is one, Newcastle and Lille are two totally different clubs these days, and two, there's no minimum fee release clauses in France. So Cabaye always had an agreement with Lille, especially after the success that they'd enjoyed with PSG coming under Qatari ownership. There was never really going to be any chance for them to sustain that success. The owner knew at some point as well that he would probably try to sell the club. So, Lille establishing themselves as France's dominant power was never really going to happen. And because of that, Cabaye and a number of other star players, Eden Hazard back in the day as well, had agreements that if clubs from a certain league came in, they would essentially have an agreed exit. And the agreed exit, was that, in the event of a reasonable offer coming in, that Cabaye would move on, and that's ultimately what happened. It wasn't like Lille were, held over a barrel, for such a low fee. It was just that there was a general agreement, almost like a gentleman's agreement, that Cabaye would move on, and Newcastle were the beneficiaries of that fantastic deal. And he never managed to live up to his best performances with Newcastle anywhere else that he went. He came to PSG, came back to Liga afterwards, and was not able to perform at the same level, and didn't have the same importance at any of the other teams that he joined. Despite the fact that he was a fantastic talent and really set the Premier League alight for a while.
You were talking before about the young players and the pipeline for the young players in France. One of the other young players at the moment is Hugo Ekitike. So this is, he's turned 20 today, I think it is. Happy birthday, Hugo. But he plays for Ram. I think I've pronounced that right. Newcastle had a bid accepted for him in January, but he decided at the last moment that it was a bit rushed and he thought he would wait, which I think is fair enough. We've apparently got an agreement in place now. There's differing reports about whether it's going to be 30 million or 12 million, or what it's going to be up front, or how it's going to be structured, or even if it's going to be an initial loan. What's your understanding, Jonathan, about where that's at with Hugo Ekitike?
Yeah, Ekitike is a player who's got a really interesting profile, really burst onto the scene in the season just gone. And Reims, that's the pronunciation of the club. They know that they have a player of significant potential who could extract a very large fee. And one of the other clubs interested in Ekitike, given that he's an impressive domestic talent, sort of the rare potential that PSG would actually consider making an offer for him. They are looking at him, and with Luis Campos, the formerly of Monaco and Lille, now basically shaping the sporting strategy, suddenly there is this possibility that PSG might make a move for him. They're looking at other players as well, Sanchez being one of them, who we've already discussed. So it's my understanding that Ekitike, despite knowing that he has this offer, from Newcastle and from the Premier League, he has interest across Europe as well, and the possibility that PSG might come and take a look at him as well, I think has prompted him to want to take his time a little bit. Reims, don't have any budgetary concerns either in the season just gone or the one coming up. They know that at some point there is going to be, a major windfall from such a young talent. Basically, it's a question of him being ready to, take the best decision for him, because I think they know now that they will be significantly rewarded financially wherever he goes.
Yeah, he's a very interesting player, and it's a lot of confusion here that we're signing him to be our second striker. So not as a development player, but as our backup to our main striker, Callum Wilson. And Callum is a very injury-prone player, so there might be a lot that falls on Hugo's shoulders straight away. Is he capable of playing 20, 25 games in the Premier League straight away, or do you think that's just too much too soon?
No, I definitely think that he has that potential. I mean, you look at the way that he's taken sort of the burden of the attack, being the focal point for the attack for Reims in the season just gone. It's been very impressive. I mean, like I said, he was a bit of an unknown coming into last season. So for him to suddenly burst on the scene and now, basically be indispensable to Reims, it's there might be a temptation for some people to say he's a one-season wonder, but they can't actually point to any other campaigns in his senior career and say that he didn't quite perform as well somewhere else, because it's literally his first season at senior level. But he is somebody who is very mature, an old head on young shoulders, so to speak, and the decisions that he's made and the way that he approaches the situation suggests that he is a smart individual. He'll know what he's capable of, and I don't think that he would have waited, and spurned the opportunity to move in January if he was not sure that he needed to develop a little bit longer in Liga. And I think he's had that now. So he's had that first full season. And I think that if he's considering a move this summer, it's that he feels ready in terms of his technique and where his development might best be served next. I don't think anyone can really argue that he does need some sort of European experience sometime soon if he's to continue on this upward trajectory. But obviously switching from Ligue 1 to the Premier League would be a massive step as well. And I think coming in sort of as one of a number of attacking options in a rotation to start with would probably be a smart move. But I definitely think that he has the ability to potentially come in, say, the first time that Wilson maybe is unavailable, and then make a case for himself to be sort of the regular starting option from there on in.
Has he played from the wing as well then, like the wide forward position, or has he mainly been through the middle?
I mean, to be honest, he has kind of played around pretty much every position in the front line that you can imagine. There's always a temptation when a player has that kind of profile that they have the ability to use their speed out wide, but also he's such a prolific and clinical finisher that it makes a lot of sense to play him through the middle. And I think when you have that ability, it's logical that they would pursue sort of a central berth, moving forward. And I think, France is a country that has so much talent, but there's not that many sort of out and out strikers and goal scorers coming through sort of in the same mold as a Benzema and a Giroud. And obviously Benzema, even he has become, a very complete player, somebody who can score and create goals. Whereas, Giroud is sort of like the last of the real kind of, focal point, target man kind of figures. And I wouldn't say that Ekitike is going to be a target man sort of in that sense. He doesn't have the same build, the same kind of attributes as Giroud, but in terms of like a prolific presence in the attack, I definitely think that he has the potential to sort of play through the middle and be that for club and potentially for country in the future if he continues to develop as well as he has with Reims.
Bobby's already told us that he's a mixture between Mbappe and Thierry Henry, so that got us quite excited.
No. I did not say that. I said his movement and the way he runs with the ball, his feet reminds me very much of an Henry, but I clarified by saying he was never as good.
Well, right. One name I'll throw at you guys, and I mean, he probably has. There are probably mixed memories of him. He joined Liverpool from PSG at a very young age, but he, I think, could be the player that everyone expected David Ngo to be for Liverpool all those years ago. He reminds me of him, and I think he is probably not going to have the same issues that Ngo had, kind of away from the pitch, or almost suffering from having too much too young. I think wherever Ekitike ends up next, he is mature enough to handle any potential setbacks or obstacles in his career, and ultimately make the most of his talent and physique. But obviously there is the temptation, to sort of compare him with Mbappe because of the fact that he's sort of the leading French talent at this moment in time, but also Henry, given his legendary status in the Premier League. But I'd say that Ngo, not necessarily a better version of Ngo, but what the player Ngo could have been is how I would view Ekitike.
Awesome. And the third player that we've been pretty strongly linked with, and I think this is just because he's Bruno's best friend, but Lucas Paqueta, he seems the least likely of these three to be signing. Maybe he's not a priority position for Newcastle at the moment, and because of the fee that Lyon seem to be asking for, which is 60 million plus potentially. What's next for Paqueta? Is he definitely moving on this summer?
Yeah, Paqueta is an interesting one because Lyon, he's been very important for Lyon, been very impressive since joining them. But Lyon seem to be taking their project back to basics a little bit and going for more of the players that have come through the academy so that they re-establish their identity a little bit. And that's understandable. Also, I'd say that Paqueta's form has dropped off a little bit since the start of the year. Fantastically talented player, lovely to watch, and is highly rated by a number of players who've been convinced of his talent over the years. Leonardo, if he'd stayed as sporting director at PSG, probably would have tried to bring him in as well. But I think that valuation that Lyon slapped on him back in January is no longer as valid. And I think a lot of what happens in the next couple of weeks with Lyon in terms of who else they can bring in alongside the likes of Lacazette, there's discussions about Tolisso coming back to Lyon at this moment in time, and also the investment situation with the club because they're in talks of selling 40% of the club's shares. Once they have a better idea of how the future is going to look, then they will know, players that they can potentially let go of and whether they can revise some of these valuations of the players. But Lyon are quite rare in that they're a French club that are registered on the stock market, so they have certain financial pressures, where they need to meet, certain goals. So having Paqueta move on at least from sort of the beginning of July will probably be more preferable than getting rid of him now before the end of this month.
That's interesting what you've said a couple of times there about the timing of potentially selling players after July when it's the new season's accounting. I didn't think that would be a factor. You don't think about these things unless you know, do you, really?
Well, I mean, I think as well it's becoming increasingly important for France in the last couple of years because let's not forget it's probably one of the leagues that was worst hit by the impact of COVID. One, because the season was cancelled prematurely. Two, because the TV deal collapsed because of it. And three, just because so many of the clubs actually were living hand to mouth, basically on match day revenue, which suddenly disappeared for the best part of 2 years. So financial importance has taken on an even greater role for a lot of these clubs. So they have to be even more cautious. So when you have the opportunity to cash in on one of your better players and you're in a financial state that's probably passable with the French financial watchdog, I think the temptation is there to pass your meeting with the DNCG and then set up next season's accounts and then suddenly have a big influx of money come in there, which you can then actually look to invest intelligently and still sort of not be beyond your means for that new season.
And Lyon did get a big influx of money in January from Newcastle for Bruno. He has just taken absolutely everyone at Newcastle by storm. He's been outstanding. He's scored 5 goals, which I think is more than he scored for Lyon. Did you see him have the impact he's had at Newcastle, or do you think he's exceeded expectations from what you saw of him in France?
I think he's ahead of what I probably would have expected him to be at this time. It doesn't surprise me, that he is fit in well. I've always thought he's a player of major talent. I didn't expect him to be as prolific as that, but quite often, you will see a player adapt to the Premier League in a different way, having come from Ligue 1. Perhaps he was deployed a little too defensively with Lyon, but everybody knew that he had fantastic technique and there was a top player there. So no, it doesn't surprise me to see that he's bedding in fairly well at Newcastle. I just didn't expect him to sort of be contributing in the way that he has done so quickly. It didn't surprise me that he started the first few games sort of on the bench, getting a feel for things. But as soon as he had a taste for it, there was no stopping him really. And fingers crossed that development continues because I did say at the time when he joined Newcastle that he was a fantastic talent, and I thought that Newcastle had done some very good business there.
I think he's one that we can build our team around for many years, hopefully. And it's nice for us to be able to sign in players of that quality. He's going to be going to the World Cup for Brazil as well. So long may that continue for us. All right, let's just think about the possibility then of these 3 players. Can you give us a mark out of 10 for how likely it is, do you think, that Newcastle will sign these players? Sven Botman first.
Sven Botman, sort of a 7.5 out of 10, I guess.
That's all right. Ekitike?
I'd rate that lower. I'd probably go 6 out of 10.
All right. And Paqueta?
That'll probably be 5 or below for me now.
Yeah.
All right. So Botman, Ekitike, Paqueta. That sounds about what we would think, isn't it, Bobby?
Yeah, I think so. About right.
All right. All right. Excellent. Jonathan, thanks very much for your time. That's been really insightful for us. You've been very generous there. And it gives our fans something to think about and get excited about. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me on, guys. Really enjoyed it, and hopefully catch up again soon.
Thank you very much. And cheers, Bobby.
Okay. Thanks, mate. See ya.